Hi, my name is Clark Neely, and I'm Senior Vice President for Legal Studies at the Cato Institute. And I'm here to talk to you today about criminal law. This is one of the most fearsome powers that the government possesses. It's the power to punish somebody by taking away their liberty, by putting them in a cage. And so there are a number of questions that are extremely important to understand about criminal law. And they include, why should we have criminal law in the first place? What kinds of conduct is it appropriate for the government to criminalize? Are there any things the government can't criminalize? And what are appropriate ways of punishing people? So let's start with that basic question. Why do we have a criminal law at all? And the answer to that question is that in any given society, there are just going to be some people who either cannot or will not respect the right of other people to go on about their lives peacefully. They're going to take their stuff, they're going to hurt them in some way, they might even kill them. And the question is, what do you do about that? And a society that does nothing about that is going to have huge problems. It's going to destroy the fabric of civil society if the government doesn't provide any response to people who hurt other people. Among other things, it's going to cause people to have to take it upon themselves to protect themselves. If you've ever been to a country where there are bars on the windows of every house and every business, and where they have to pull that steel door down in front of a business at nighttime, you've seen what I'm talking about. And you don't want people having to protect themselves from crime when the government should be out there doing it instead. And then the other thing that's going to happen, which is even worse, is that for at least some crimes, people are going to take the law into their own hands, so to speak. They are going to be the ones that try to go out there and do justice. And we call that vigilantism. When somebody hurts someone you love or they hurt you, and you go out there and you pay them back. And there is no surer way to destroy the fabric of civil society than to have a kind of a cycle of vigilantism. So we need the government to identify conduct that threatens the very fabric of civil society, and then to discourage that conduct, and when necessary, to punish it. And that's why we have criminal law. So then the next question is, what should the government criminalize? And the answer is suggested by the first point, which is only that conduct that genuinely threatens the very fabric of civil society. And what would that be? Well, that would be things like murder, violent assault, significant acts of theft, fraud, things like that, things that cause serious injury to a person and that they cannot reasonably be expected to not do anything about. Those are the kinds of things that threaten the very fabric of civil society, and it is vitally important that the government criminalize that activity so that they can, again, discourage and, when necessary, punish it. This gets really tricky, right? Because reasonable people can disagree about exactly what conduct does or does not threaten the very fabric of civil society. There are some things I don't think there's any reasonable disagreement about, and I gave you some examples. Murder, violent assault, significant acts of theft. But here's an interesting question. What about burning an American flag? And this is something that some people do as a form of protest. Is that something that the government can criminalize or not? And believe it or not, we got an answer from the Supreme Court. 5-4. 5 justices said no, that's not something the government can criminalize, and 4 justices said yes, it is, because that's the kind of conduct that makes people so upset and so angry that they can be expected to react violently, and we don't want people to do that. So this is an ongoing and challenging question within criminal law. What are the bounds of the government's ability to criminalize activity, and where does that run into our rights to do things like express ourselves or have relationships with other people that are none of the government's business? And that leads us to the last question, which is, what are the forms of punishment that are legitimate for a government to use in our times? Because in older times, of course, there are all kinds of horrific punishments that you can read about, and hopefully you're not too familiar with all of them, but these involve things like physical mutilation, putting people in a stockade and letting other people throw rocks and garbage at them, and of course, capital punishment, where people were simply hung. And there was a time in England when every felony was a capital punishment. You could be put to death for it. But now we live in a more, I think we can say, civilized time. And the primary form of punishment in this country is incarceration, locking people up. But that can still be a very brutal form of punishment, and it's important that the government get it right, by which I mean not locking people up for longer than we can justify. And there are many different justifications for locking people up, but the primary ones are incapacitation, which means putting them over here where they can't hurt people, and disincentivizing them, making clear that if you do this, then you're going to suffer this unpleasant punishment. And those are the main rationales for punishment. But I would say one of the biggest problems in our system is that the judiciary doesn't seem to have a very clear theory of how much is too much. But that is something that we can talk about in another video.